Hello everyone, I'm Peter McPartlin, co-founder of The Indie List, Ireland's leading platform for freelance and contract talent in the marketing sector. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the latest in our series of free marketing webinars in collaboration with our host businessplus.ie, the go-to channel for SMEs in Ireland. We know that the pace of change in business, especially for marketeers, continues to accelerate. Keeping up with new trends, tech advancements and increased competition can feel overwhelming, and it leaves little time to step back and plan your next move. That's why we've created this free webinar series, Future-Proofing Your Marketing Strategy for 2025. Across these short sessions, we'll explore actionable insights designed to help you stay ahead with a focus on key themes such as consumer behavior, creativity and content. Today's session focuses on creative thinking, particularly how creativity has the power to transform the fortunes of a business or a brand like nothing else. Even in this age of Gen AI, creativity has been described as the last legal, unfair competitive advantage to outrun the competition. Today's presenter is Ray Sheerin. Ray is uniquely positioned to talk about creativity, given his great track record as a business founder, a marketing strategist, and a copywriter. He has over 35 years' experience of developing and leading brand and communication strategies for clients in just about every sector. Having founded and run agencies in activation, advertising, brand, design, digital, and direct marketing, Ray also has unrivaled experience of most disciplines across the marketing mix. He set up and ran Chemistry, Ireland's leading creative agency, for 21 years until 2020. He's a chartered director of the Institute of Directors, a former board director of IAPI, and he was awarded the honorary fellowship of the Institute of Advertising Practitioners in Ireland in 2023. Ray, you're very welcome.
Okay, thank you, Peter. The theme of my talk is harnessing creativity, specifically using creativity to give your business a competitive edge. Now, this carries an inbuilt assumption that the target audience for this is people in business and people who might not be using creativity in their business to full advantage yet. I've spent my whole career providing creative thinking to businesses and brands in just about every sector, in multiple markets and in lots of different economic environments. In all that time, I've seen the power of creative thinking, how it can transform the fortunes of a business or brand like nothing else can. There is simply no other professional service that can achieve the same level of transformation as a really powerful creative idea. Now, there's a legendary UK ad man called Dave Trott, who we'll be referring to a few times in this presentation, and he has written and he speaks extensively on this topic. One of the things that he says that I really like is that creativity is the last legal unfair competitive advantage we can take to run over the competition. Now, for clarity, when I talk about creativity, I don't just mean ads or communications. What I mean by creativity is the Webster's dictionary definition, which is artistic or intellectual inventiveness. The word inventiveness is key here, which means having new and original ideas. So just pause to think about that for a second. New and original. I will come back to this several times. Think how much or how little of your thinking is new or original, how much in your company is, and what I hope this talk does is to encourage you to think new and original thoughts more often, to incorporate more creative thinking in your business, and I'll give you a few tips or techniques that I hope will be helpful. Now, we live at the moment in something that I would call an era of abundance, by which I mean that we have more choice in the products and services available to us than ever before. Great for us as consumers, but tougher for us as businesses. This means that a great product, well priced with excellent distribution, is no longer enough to guarantee success. It has to stand out in the mind of the consumer, and that is not easy. I read recently that the average person gets more than 100 emails a day and more than 50 text or WhatsApp messages. Then estimates of the number of ads seen per day range from 4,000 to 10,000. It's just as well that our brains are brilliant at filtering out, or we'd melt down. So it's vital that you use creativity to make sure your message cuts through immediately, or it will be lost. In the early 1960s, a very famous ad man called Rosser Reeves, who was the inspiration for Don Draper and Mad Men, coined the term unique selling proposition. He defined it as something that the competition either cannot or does not offer. It must be unique, either a uniqueness of the brand or a claim not otherwise made in that particular field. Now, these days, there's little or no uniqueness in products and services, or if any do exist, they tend to be short-lived as they can be copied so quickly. So brands now have to differentiate themselves based on perceived differences more so than actual ones. In a nutshell, that's why creative thinking is so important and so valuable. But it continues to amaze me that creative thinking is valued less rather than more in business. More than half of the CEOs in FTSE 100 companies are accountants or from another finance background. That's an increase of 100% in the last 25 years. And there are generally far more accountants on boards of directors than any other profession. They're also more likely to be called Stephen than they are to be female, but that's another day's discussion. My point is not anti-accountants. I work with and have worked with some superb finance people, but when you look at the founders of companies, the entrepreneurs, very few are accountants. Again, with notable exceptions, like Larissa Feeney at Kinnower Finance and Business Services, Brendan Dowling at Celtic Leadership. Mostly though, entrepreneurs, including those two, are creative thinkers in the broad sense. Entrepreneurs, like inventors, come up with their ideas by creativity, not by taking one logical step after another. First, they intuit the solution, and then they apply logic to test that it works. That's creativity. So again, my issue is not with the number of people from finance backgrounds at the most senior levels in companies. It's with the current overemphasis on left brain thinking at the expense of right brain thinking. The left side of our brains is rational, logical, and very slow moving. The right hemisphere is all about intuition, emotion, and it's incredibly quick. The right side of our brains is what has allowed human beings to evolve, to stay alive as a species, by making instant decisions in times of crisis when there is no time for logic. It's what a colleague of mine, Mike Garner, describes as the difference between deciding what to have for lunch and being lunch. In life, the absolute vast majority of the decisions we make are right brain. We might like to think that we're very logical, but the reality is that we make decisions on emotion and impact, and then we post-rationalize, supplying ourselves with the logical reasons for making that particular decision. In business, however, it's different. Because of the overemphasis on logic and rational thinking, everything in business these days needs to be justified, to be cost-benefit analysed, and if it can't, it's usually rejected. I can't remember where I first read that what matters most these days to people in business and government is not a successful outcome. It's the ability to defend their decision, whatever the outcome. It's a way to close down the thinking in order to make a decision which can then be justified by logical means. Sort of computer says no. Whether it is the right decision or whether there could have been a better one is not factored in. That is such a loss for business. In my view, this is probably the biggest opportunity cost to businesses these days. So the big problem is that by forcing everything through this logic mangle, anything unfamiliar or non-conforming tends to be rejected. There is a saying that logic is the enemy of magic, and it is especially true in business. If businesses operate on rational, provable basis only, decisions won't get made unless it can be proven in advance that the outcome will be successful. But by definition, if it's something which hasn't been done before, it's not possible to prove it in advance. Some of you will know The Marketunist cartoons by Tom Fishburne. This is a great cartoon where a boss tells his marketers that they need to do something so innovative that no brand has ever done anything like it. But then when they present the innovative idea to him, his reaction is that it seems risky, and he asks for examples of other brands that have done this. The biggest and best creative ideas are leaps. They do not follow a linear logical process. Let me give you two great examples. Everybody knows Cadbury's Dairy Milk's gorilla ad. With the life-size gorilla playing drums to Phil Collins, I can feel it coming in the air tonight. It's a superb example of creativity and intuition trumping logic. The world's largest tester of ads, Millward Brown, found that this ad pre-tested poorly among women on its measures of awareness and brand appeal, and it was about average among men. Phil Rumble, who was then Cadbury's marketing director, actually went ahead and shot this ad without getting the approval of Cadbury's management. It then took him 6 months to persuade them to ignore the research and air the ad. And when they did, its return on investment was 3 times the average for packaged goods campaigns. And it is now the UK's most popular ad of all time, having overtaken Guinness Surfer. That illustrates the problem with trying to pre-justify every decision. People are more comfortable with what is familiar to them and are far more likely to reject the unfamiliar. This has the effect of dumbing down creativity, disabling its most potent weapon and most important task, which is to stand out. Now, I've said it before, brilliant creative thinking is not limited to ads or communications. Remember the Webster Dictionary definition as showed at the start, artistic or intellectual inventiveness. The next idea is a brilliant example of intellectual inventiveness. So this comes from a great podcast that I heard a few years ago, which had a brilliant example of apparently illogical creativity. So it was a residential care home located a number of miles outside of Dusseldorf. And most of the residents had dementia or Alzheimer's. And when people do that classic thing with dementia where they wander off, getting agitated, it's very often because they think that, for example, their child needs them urgently. So even though this child is now, an adult. So this home was constantly trying to track down old people who were getting lost in a major city. An elderly man, an advisor to the board at the home, came up with an apparently illogical but magical suggestion, which is to put a bus stop outside the home. Now, no buses went down this street. It was a quiet residential street. But the fact of putting a bus stop there, as I say, completely illogical, but residents who would be fleeing would see the bus stop, then wait 10 or 15 minutes for a bus to come along, by which point they might have calmed down, and or a staff member would have spotted them and brought them back indoors and safe. There's also another brilliant UK ad man and behavioural economist, a fellow called Ray Sheerin, who I'll refer to a couple of times. He talks a lot about the benefits of illogical thinking. He's written extensively on this. And he points out that logic can never solve a persistent problem, because if it could, the solution would have already been found. So effectively, it is permission to think illogically, which is incredibly liberating. That's why organizations need to foster and encourage creativity. It's how new solutions are found. It's how businesses can differentiate themselves rather than just doing the same thing as their competitors. Sutherland gives a great example in one of his talks. It's the St. Pancras railway station redevelopment, which cost £250 million. And every press release around the time mentioned that it had the longest champagne bar in Europe. Now that's actually completely peripheral to the main function. And it's probably the first thing that an accountant would kill off in order to save money. The thing that, to quote Sutherland, makes the product delightfully different. So nobody goes, I'm thinking of going to a champagne bar. Do you know any long ones? Or I don't go to that champagne bar anymore because it's not long enough. But it's that simple bit of human novelty that changes St. Pancras from a utilitarian transit hub into a destination in its own right. I think that in recent years, businesses think of creativity as being limited to advertising and marketing. And of course it does include them, but creativity can and should also be used to provide creative solutions to business opportunities or problems. So let me give you a couple of recommendations on how to harness creativity in your business. I've already said that there's very little actual difference in products and services these days, because if you've got a competitive advantage that is based on product or service superiority, it can be short-lived. But it does exist in people's heads, and it endures in people's heads. Consumers have very strong brand preferences that very often defy logic. A great example is Pepsi versus Coke. In pretty much every blind taste test ever, people prefer the taste of Pepsi to the taste of Coke. But Coke has more than double Pepsi's market share. For the last 30 years, Coke has maintained a market share of between 17 and 20%, more than doubles Pepsi's at about 8%. So if you can't be different, make sure that you appear to be so. It's not the actual difference, it's the perceived difference. Second point, don't try to please everyone, because if you do, you will end up pleasing no one. Michael Porter of Harvard Business School, who has been described as the founder of modern strategy, says that the essence of strategy is deciding what not to do. So instead of it being always, we must do this, this, and this, you really need to decide what you're not going to do, narrow it down and focus. Far too often, business decisions are made on the basis that the deciding group, in quotes, didn't have a problem with it. That probably means that it's actually the lowest common denominator, so it's likely to be bland. It's likely to be ineffective. And I'll give you some proof of that just now. Back to Dave Trott, who I've already mentioned. So in one of his books, this one here, Predatory Thinking, he measures the effectiveness of communications in the UK. Every year, over 20 billion sterling is spent, of which just 4% is remembered positively. 7% of it is remembered negatively, but at least it's remembered, so it's not wasted. But 89% of the spend every year is neither noticed nor remembered. That's over 18 billion sterling every year of communications wastage. For the size of the Irish communications market, Alex Gibson of TU Dublin reckons that you could prorata it to about 1 billion. I absolutely believe that the same percentages would apply, so that would equate to some 890 million euro unnoticed and unremembered communications each year in Ireland. A related point to this is about groupthink. We all know that there is far too little real diversity in business. Very often businesses are filled with people who have similar backgrounds, have similar lived experiences, and have similar points of view. My recommendation is to seek out and listen to points of view that are different to your own. A different point of view might change your own viewpoint, or it might solve a problem that you're struggling with, like the elderly man in the German care home. At a minimum, what it will do is to help clarify your thinking. If you're trying to figure something out, a great trick is to talk to somebody who knows absolutely nothing about it. The very process of structuring your thinking enough to explain it often allows the solution to present itself. In my agency days, I'd often talk to my wife about something I couldn't resolve on my own. She had no involvement in the ad business and even less interest, truth to be told. Most of the time though, before I got even to the end of the explanation, I'd know what I needed to do. So the very act of having to structure it, to explain it, helped me to have much more clarity. So to help program your brain to start thinking up new and original ideas, expose yourself to different cultural experiences than what you would normally do. So read books, ideally of a sort that you wouldn't normally read. Listen to different genres of music. When you're in a restaurant, order something you wouldn't normally order. Visit museums and galleries, and listen to podcasts. There's so much brilliant stuff being produced, and much of it is free. The point here is challenge yourself. Behave differently, and you'll be able to start thinking differently. New and original thoughts. So when you're looking for creative thinking or any sort of innovation, assemble as diverse a team as you possibly can. It's the different minds working together that will come up with the best thinking, and this has been proven now in so many different studies. Some of you will know a great marketer called Damien Devaney. I remember many years ago when Damien was at Diageo, he put together an innovation team consisting of all sorts of people, all sorts of different backgrounds, many from outside the business entirely, including a priest. Why not? Most of the best ideas, especially the best creative ideas, occur to people at times when they're not working. So you talk to anybody who's famous for ideas, they will say they got an idea when they were walking on a mountain, or out for a run, or having a glass of wine in the evening, not when they're technically working. And this is partly because their subconscious mind is continuing to work when they have stopped trying to think. Now, there's a lot of dispute among neuroscientists about how much of our total mental processing power our conscious mind uses. But if we could learn to access and harness more of our subconscious minds, imagine how much more we would get done. So try this technique. When you're at home in the evening and find yourself thinking about a work challenge or a problem that you can't resolve, deliberately stop thinking about it. And every time your conscious mind tries to bring you back to it, stop it again. What will happen is that your subconscious mind will find the solution for you. I've been using this technique for years, and the more you use it, the better you become at it. For me, it's in my morning shower that most of my best solutions pop into my head, almost unbidden, fully figured out. That's the subconscious mind. So it's like a muscle, develop it. To finish, you should regularly upskill yourself and your team. Most professional bodies these days have a minimum annual requirement of continuous professional development days. Why not do the same for creativity and innovation? I know this is going to sound like an ad, but I, as well as other people with the Indie List, do lots of workshops in this area, as well as marketing skills audience, auditing, mentoring, development, effectiveness training, pitch consultancy. So you know what to do. Thanks for watching.
Okay, Ray, thank you for that. That was a super presentation.
Thanks, Peter.
Just talk to me again about why you believe that creativity is undervalued in business generally, but also marketing in particular. You know, a business that kind of thrives on what you would think is creativity, what seems to undervalue it.
Yeah, I think partly it is because of the dominance of logical, rational thinking, stuff that needs to be assessed fully in advance. And the trouble is, with a lot of creativity, you can't do that, because the more unfamiliar the idea is, the less it conforms to all of the norms that people are used to, the more likely it is to be rejected by boards of directors, by senior management, even by consumers and focus groups. So there is a big gravitational push towards very normative work, which is that 89% of work that doesn't get noticed or remembered. And I think that's why all the pressure is on there. Businesses are reluctant to invest in creativity because it is perceived to be risky, even though there is in business absolutely no reward without some level of risk. The requirement to cost-benefit analyze everything and so on sometimes means that work which is creatively brave won't get done.
And this word or this phrase that's often used, I'll know it when I see it, or I like it. I know what I like, as opposed to I like what I know. Yeah. Is that kind of part and parcel of that kind of behaviour as well?
Well, it is, because a lot of the people who are saying that are people who are maybe not the ideal person or the ideal people to be making that sort of decision. So just because they like it is not enough of a reason to choose it. Chances are they're not even the target audience. So they shouldn't be doing that. What they should be doing is to trust people who understand the target audience better, to bring in the subject matter experts who've got skills in those areas, who can say, this consumer is very different to the one that you're thinking of, and this is what's going to work for them. And they essentially need to go with that rather than imposing their own strict criteria on it, based on their own limitations, really.
I know you've talked at length about creative thinking in its broadest sense. And talk to me in relation to Irish business, because I think sometimes we're guilty here of maybe being a little bit conservative when it comes to creative thinking, but there have been brilliant examples of Irish companies that have really stood apart and gained as a result of their creativity.
Yeah, so I'll start with maybe a little bit of an odd one there, which is Ryanair. I mean, Ryanair would not be known for very good communications. They would be known probably for the opposite. A lot of what they do from a communications point of view can be a bit tacky, can sometimes be in quite poor taste. The notable exception to that, oddly, is the work that they do on TikTok. So they actually do very good work on TikTok, even though they don't do very good work in, for instance, print or outdoor. And I suspect that's because TikTok as a medium slightly favours work which is lo-fi in terms of production values and can be a little bit tacky. But they essentially completely redefined air travel. I mean, that was massive creativity by going totally against the flow of everything else that was happening, in the world at the time. So it's probably the best example of that type of creative thinking that isn't to do with communications. When you look at the communication side of things, I think that businesses are doing even better and continuing to do better there. So I would call out the work that, at chemistry we did with the Irish Examiner for about 12 years, where, it really stood out. I was presenting it to an overseas client last week who had never seen it before, and he was completely blown away by it. The Examiner won the Client Award from ICAD, for that particular one. But there's also been really interesting examples recently with the Effie Awards, the Effectiveness Awards, which took place last week. And that was, it's great because it's a global competition and the standard is global. So, there's none of that was the judging fair type thing that goes on normally with awards. But if you look at the 4 gold winners, all 4 of them were not-for-profits, which is absolutely amazing. And then 2 of them, there was the Quit smoking campaign for HSE, which is done by Publicis, and then Javelin's work for not sharing inappropriate imagery online. Two of those gold winners again. And what's really interesting about those is that they're effectively behavioral change campaigns. So absolutely effective from a, as I say, not-for-profit category that you really wouldn't be, expecting that. One final then good example would be in terms of creative thinking. Is this a creative idea? I'm not sure. It's certainly a creative idea. Whether it's an ad or not, I don't know. But the way that Tourism Ireland, Bord Fáilte, rebranded the country, starting with the Wild Atlantic Way, the problem at the time was, I can't remember the stats, but the vast majority of people went to Dublin and essentially the Pale inbound tourism and didn't go further than that. So what they needed to do was to drag people to the western seaboard. The Wild Atlantic Way did that incredibly effectively. And then since then, they've also, branded Ancient East and Hidden Heartlands. That is superb creative thinking. Taking an existing product, but framing it in a way, to give it massive appeal.
Yeah, even though obviously elements of the country or parts of those parts of the country are not terribly attractive from a weather point of view, but you're packaging, as I say, in a completely different way.
Exactly, and by calling it wild, well, what are you expecting?
Absolutely. Very good. In terms of organisations generally, I mean, there is, as you again highlighted in the presentation, a tendency to kind of favour logic over creativity. How can organisations kind of break down or ensure that good creative ideas, and again, we're moving beyond the area of kind of advertising and PR and so on into kind of creative thinking that will make a difference in the business, but how can organisations ensure that creative thinkers and creative thinking has its best chance of being heard?
So I think that some organisations have been doing this and have been, making very good efforts in it. You take Heineken Ireland, for instance. For a long time they have had a role which is to do with innovation. Okay, I would love to see much more of that in organisations where something is being given a proper title. So as it being, as opposed to it being people from the agency who rock up a couple of times a year and present, to actually have this formally structured within an organisation where it's got a remit of trying to do, things that are going to be more, more innovative. There's something which has always fascinated me though, which is that when creative people have to present ideas, they always have to present it to non-creative people for approval. The opposite never happens. Why is that? It should happen. So when people have got their spreadsheets and all their finances and so on, I think it would make so much sense for them to have to present those to creative people, because then you're getting the left brain and the right brain working together. So instead of using, half, two heads better than one, well, I mean, at least start and use the two bloody hemispheres, will you? So I think if that happened, that would be so much better. So what I would very much favour is multidisciplinary teams, lots of diversity in there, with people who've got a creative point of view, even if they're not necessarily going to win the argument, as it were. The fact of having a different perspective is what will enable everybody else to get to a really good conclusion, and much better than if it's all just the logical, rational heads.
You touch on that diversity thing in teams quite a bit. And again, you gave a couple of examples of different organisations that do that. I mean, it's something, as you're talking there, that strikes me is very relevant in the context of Ireland and Irish government. And we could do with an awful lot more creative thinking when it comes to solving some of the issues that we have, not least around things like housing and so on. So a Minister for Creativity, maybe? A
Minister for Creativity. Now, it's very interesting again. I've talked about Rory Sutherland quite a bit, in my presentation. He heads up a thing called the Behavioural Science Unit in Ogilvy. And it is an unbelievably fascinating field. So for people who haven't looked at behavioural science, do so. Because most of it is counterintuitive, okay? The solutions that they come up with, and a lot of the solutions they're coming up with are to do with societal problems, to do with transport and infrastructure and housing and all those sorts of things. I think that governments would be well advised to start looking at that type of thinking. So instead of getting it from the policy wonks, I think they should look further afield and just try and get some more creative thinking in there. Because again, to quote Sutherland, logic never solving a persistent problem. The current government, or at least the Fine Gael part of it, have been in power for a very long time now. Housing was, I worked on the first election campaign and on the subsequent two, housing was the key issue both those times. It still is. So the persistent problem is still persisting.
Okay. Future Minister for Creativity, Ray Sheerin.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
My phone number's on my website.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ray Sheerin.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you for tuning in. This is the latest in a series of webinars done to the theme of future-proofing your marketing strategy for 2025. We've two other in the series on use cases for AI and also the mood and behaviour of Irish consumers as we head into the very challenging year that's ahead. Tune in on the Business Plus website, businessplus.ie or indielist.ie. Thanks for tuning in today.